Part 6. A Jesuit priest, Father Kircher, once asserted that on the coast of Sicily, the shells of shellfish, after being ground to powder, come to life again and start reproducing if this powder is sprinkled with salt water. The Abbé de Valmont cites this fable as a parallel to that of the phoenix that rises from its ashes. Here, then, is a water phoenix. However, the Abbé de Valmont gives little credence to the fable of either one of these phoenixes. But for me, whose outlook is governed by the imagination, there can be but one conclusion. Both phoenixes were products of the imagination. These are facts of the imagination, the very positive facts of the imaginary world. Moreover, these facts of the imagination are related to allegories of very ancient origin. Georgis Baltrusaitis recalls, page 57, that as late as the Carolingian epoch, burial grounds often contained snail shells, an allegory of a grave in which man will awaken. And in Le Bestiaire du Christ, page 922, Charbonnet-Lassalle writes, taken as a whole, with both its hard covering and its sentient organism, the shell, for the ancients, was the symbol of the human being in its entirety, body and soul. In fact, ancient symbolics used the shell as a symbol for the human body, which encloses the soul in an outside envelope, while the soul quickens the entire being, represented by the organism of the mollusk. Thus, they said, the body becomes lifeless when the soul has left it, in the same way that the shell becomes incapable of moving when it is separated from the part that gives it life. A wealth of documentation could be assembled on the subject of resurrection shells. There is no need, however, given the simplicity of the problems treated in this work, for us to insist on very remote traditions. All we have to do is to ask ourselves how, in the case of certain naive daydreams, the simplest images can nurture a tradition. Charbonnet-Lassalle says these things with all the simplicity and naivete one could wish. After quoting the book of Job with its invincible hope of resurrection, he adds, page 927, how did it happen that the quiet, earthbound snail should have been chosen to symbolize this ardent, invisible hope? The explanation is that at the gloomy time of year, when winter's death holds earth in its grip, the snail plunges deep into the ground, shuts itself up inside its shell, as though in a coffin, by means of a strong limestone epigraphum, until spring comes and sings Easter hallelujahs over its grave. Then it tears down its wall and reappears in broad daylight, full of life. I shall ask readers who may be inclined to smile at such enthusiasm to try to imagine the amazement of the archaeologist who discovered in a grave in the Indre et Loire department a coffin that contained nearly 300 snail shells placed about the skeleton from feet to waistline. Such a contact with the belief places us at the origin of all beliefs. A lost symbolism begins to collect dreams again. All the proofs that we are obliged to present one after the other, of capacity for renewal, of resurrection or reawakening of being, must be taken as coalescence of reveries. If we add to these allegories and symbolisms, if we add to these allegories and symbols of resurrection, the synthesizing nature of dreams of the powers of matter, we understand the fact that profound dreamers are unable to rule out the dream of a water phoenix. The shell itself, in which a resurrection is being prepared in the synthesizing dream, is subject to resurrection. For if the dust in the shell can experience resurrection, there is no reason why the pulverized shell should not recapture its spiraling force. Of course, a critical mind will scoff at unconditioned images, and a realist would soon demand control experiments. Here, as elsewhere, he would want to verify the images by confronting them with reality. If he were shown a mortar filled with crushed shells, he would say, "Now make a snail." But a phenomenologist's projects are more ambitious. He wants to live as the great dreamers of images lived before him. And since I have underlined certain words, I shall ask the reader to note that the word "as" is stronger than the word "like," which, as it happens, would omit a phenomenological nuance. The word "like" imitates, whereas the word "as" implies that one becomes the person who dreams the daydream. And so we shall never collect enough daydreams. And if we want to understand phenomenologically how a snail makes its house, how this flabbiest of creatures constitutes such a hard shell, how in this creature that is entirely shut in, the great cosmic rhythm of winter and spring vibrates nonetheless. And from the psychological standpoint, this is not a vain problem. It arises automatically. In fact, as soon as we return to the thing itself, as phenomenologists put it, as soon as we start to dream of a house that grows in proportion to the growth of the body that inhabits it. How can the little snail grow in its stone prison? This is a natural question, which can be asked quite naturally. I should prefer not to ask it, however, because it takes me back to the questions of my childhood. But for the Abbé de Valmont, it is a question that remains unanswered. He adds, "When it is a matter of nature, we rarely find ourselves on familiar ground. At every step there is something that humiliates and mortifies proud minds." In other words, a snail's shell, this house that grows with its inmate, is one of the marvels of the universe. And the Abbé de Valmont concludes that, in general, page 255, shells are sublime subjects of contemplation for the mind.